We're going to switch roles here. I'm going to let John carry our next wrestler on the list,
which is Hunter Hearst Helmsley, Triple H. Now, I'm going to level with everybody here. I know Triple H a little bit from his Attitude days when he hooked up with Stephanie and his feud with Vince over Stephanie McMahon and some of the shenanigans that were perpetrated there, all the way till now. I remember a little bit when he was the snobbish, almost English-like character saying, oh, look at all these ruffians, I've got to bring class back to the World Wrestling Federation, and a little bit of his time in DX with Shawn Michaels. But I will say this, as far as that, and that was the Blue Blood character, the guy who called people being ruffians in the skit. That was really something great for Triple H, because he goes from this classy, refined guy to actually the polar opposite. And I find it a lot with our crop of characters today in pro wrestling. Sometimes you have to go the other extreme to find salvation and to really find something to build upon. Ted DiBiase tried being a carbon copy of his father. Now he's trying to be more of the common man who celebrates with them, the DiBiase posse tailgate parties. Triple H had to be the same way. Here's this classy guy, law-abiding, rule-abiding, calling people ruffians, using Jericho-esque vocabulary that you'd see him cut a promo in today's ring, and become this rule-breaking, total anarchist in the ring, causing shenanigans, raising pure hell for Sergeant Slaughter and any commissioner. Absolutely, a complete degenerate, if you will.
And that's actually when we started to see Triple H build some patience. We started to see the long-term dedication to the business, because you had a character like that, like you just said, was not exactly what he was. It was a polar opposite of who he really was. But he managed to take it and, make the most out of it. And for the longest time, Triple H showed that he was going to be a big player for the WWE in the upcoming future.
Oh, absolutely. And people were so drawn to those actions, this raising hell. Again, I remember he had a feud with Owen Hart over the European Championship. That's when China was his valet. And, it was such great television because, Sergeant Slaughter was trying to get Owen the European Championship, and yet China just wasn't having it. She threw powder in Sergeant Slaughter's face. I remember this was an In Your House pay-per-view, and Triple H pretty much retained over Owen, and then they had another bout where China was in a cage and she was suspended above the air, and then you had the New Age Outlaws, bring her back down, and they screwed Owen Hart again, and they just, fucked with so many people. It was hilarious. And, when Shawn Michaels was taken out, Triple H really did carry this wagon, and not only did he carry it, in my humble opinion, he made it his own. And then, of course, as I was getting to the era that I start to remember a little bit more, when he got with Stephanie McMahon, made Vince's life pure hell. And I remember their street fight in Armageddon of '99. It was amazing. I'll tell you, Vince can have some pretty good matches when he chooses to, if he works with the right guy. I thought it was a phenomenal match. And the ending, where Stephanie supposedly wants to hit Triple H with a hammer, and she can't bring herself to do it. So Triple H capitalizes, hits Vince in the gut, nails the pedigree, gets the win, and then we see Stephanie turns on Vince and just gets with him. And it's just so confusing because you're like, what the hell? I thought she was in love with Test, and she didn't want to get with Triple H by her own volition, and she was drugged, and what's going on? And they just made such a great pair together, and they wreaked havoc. And one of the most infamous things they did was they fired Mick Foley, a.k.a. Mankind, which we'll get to a little later, and they just raised such hell. What do you think, Alyx?
It's amazing how Triple H got to that point, because, again, we're going from a guy that was, he was a degenerate. He was breaking the rules and doing it, having fun. The same guy that was on Weekly saying, I got 2 words for you, Maki Michael Buffer. Let's get ready to rumble, telling us to raise up her shirts and stuff like that. This guy took that character, who had great matches with The Rock in the ladder match, did a complete 180, and he became this serious, hell-bent on being the best in the world, which JR refers to as the cerebral assassin. And he just became this sawn-off monster inside that ring. And we started seeing, that just start to be created as time goes by in the Helmsley era and eras after that.
Absolutely. I mean, the Helmsley era to me was just fantastic because, again, you're screwing with Mankind, you're screwing with The Rock, you're screwing with virtually anybody that's a threat to your title. And what I think is so ironic, Alyx, is that Triple H goes from a guy who's breaking the rules to a guy who's making them because he has the power now, he has the influence, and that makes him the ultimate heel because he has the power at his disposal in Stephanie McMahon. He could make any rule he wanted to on the dot. He could fire anybody he wanted. In fact, he did. Because when, Jericho supposedly won the world title off of Triple H, from the fast count from Earl Hebner because Triple H antagonized him. The next week, Triple H says, Earl, you better, reverse that decision, give me back the championship, whatever. And Earl says, okay, only on the grounds that you apologize for what you did to me. And Triple H is like, okay, Earl, okay, I'll do it. So then Earl reversed the decision, the title went back to Triple H. Triple H said, I'm sorry, but one more thing, Earl, you're fired. And Triple H had the influence to do that, which put him head and shoulders above the rest in comparison to his peers and his predecessors, because he had that power at his disposal.
He became the ultimate antagonist. Something
Exactly.
that we're missing from wrestling today, in my opinion. That one strong antagonist, that where people just look at him, it's like, anybody that you put up against Triple H and you beat him, you're immediately over. Because he became that asshole, like, hey, the best way to describe it, he was the rule maker. He went from being the rule breaker to the guy that was making the rules now. And the rules that he was making was like, he was the perfect antagonist, and it was that antagonist that helped put over people. So Triple H was great for what he was during the time, definitely.
To fast forward, we have the quad injury, and he makes a return at the Royal Rumble, wins it, last eliminating Kurt Angle. We see the relationship on screen between him and Stephanie is on the fritz, and we have a classic bout between Triple H and Kurt Angle at No Way Out with Stephanie as special guest referee, because at that point, their marriage has imploded. Stephanie lied to Triple H about being pregnant, and Triple H is like, oh, hell no, this bitch is gonna get got. Not under my nose, which is so huge. So they have this match at No Way Out, and honestly, Alex, I don't know if you saw that match. I have No Way Out on VHS.
I saw it.
Amazing wrestling match, because Stephanie McMahon actually understood the psychology of being a special guest referee, unlike some other woman who did it this year. Karen Jarrett. She wasn't even a part of the whole match. She got taken out inadvertently by Kurt, and then we have referee Tim White coming in, and then she kicks him pretty much in the Lucky Charms. It's just so back and forth and crazy. Triple H does get screwed. Now, I don't remember how Triple H regained his WrestleMania title shot. I don't remember that. I think it had something to do with Kane. Kane had a hand in it, which is why Kurt Angle faced Kane at WrestleMania 18, because he blamed Kane for screwing him out of his spot. But then Triple H goes, he faces Jericho, and they have an okay match. Honestly, what wasn't the best match I've ever seen. I love that Triple H finally got to pedigree Stephanie and get his catharsis, get all those feelings out in that one thunderous pedigree, and it was a great WrestleMania moment. And then the two titles would be unified with the Undisputed Championship, which he only held for 4 weeks. Alex, care to elaborate on that little feud?
Oh, man. The feud itself, to me, was, honestly, it wasn't one of my favorites, but it was what it was. What I do want to talk about was the night he returned in Madison Square Garden. And that crowd went absolutely fucking nuts for Triple H when he came out. And Triple H even said it in an interview somewhere, I forgot where it was, but he said that he cried. That pop was so big. That pop got him, it hit him so hard, it made him cry. That just showed you how much respect and how much the crowd saw, the dedication, the love, the passion, the student of the game. That's what he calls himself. He's a student of the game. He understood pro wrestling. And the audience saw that when he came back, and they just popped. They just lost their minds to Triple H that night. And I just think that night was one of those defining moments for Triple H that truly showed and illustrated what kind of a veteran, or maybe even a legend, that Triple H is.
I cannot argue that point. I mean, the Rumble itself was memorable. I mean, you had Jericho retain against The Rock for the Undisputed Championship. You had Maven eliminating The Undertaker. That's a moment that's going to haunt him till the day he dies, I guarantee you. And then you had Triple H return and get this massive pop. And the crowd just erupted when he eliminated Angle. And I remember Angle celebrating because he thought he had eliminated Triple H, faked him out, facebuster, clothesline, bam, Triple H goes to WrestleMania. And I thought he was such a powerful face that I really wish his Undisputed title run was longer. The idea that it was only 4 weeks and was dropped at the hands of Hulk Hogan, which I get it from a business sense. It was the comeback story. He was the Rocky Balboa. But I just feel like after all that hard work, after the story that Triple H had, returning from the quad and what have you, 4 weeks? To me, Alex, I thought that was very weak.
It was. They could have given him a much longer run than that, but apparently WWE had plans to turn him back to being a heel. Don't know why, but I think it had something to do with him just being, perhaps, maybe, he just wasn't working as good as he wanted to as a babyface, and that's just what his role is. Sometimes people just work better in one role. Although Triple H is a pretty good babyface, I think he's just like 10 times better as a heel, and maybe he felt that exact same way.
Triple H's heel work, I mean, one of the biggest moments for him being a heel was when he got practically awarded the World Heavyweight Championship at the hands of Eric Bischoff, which started his first big title defense, which I enjoyed. Triple H versus Rob Van Dam at Unforgiven of that year. And around that time, we had the little side story of Triple H pretty much mentally and emotionally picking apart Ric Flair. Because Ric Flair was pretty much falling apart. In fact, at one point, he lost a match to Rico. Yeah, nightmares. And he said, you pretty much lost to a guy who couldn't even hold his own balls in place. I mean, that's what Triple H literally told Flair. And he was just really mentally playing those mind games with him. And it all came to a head at Unforgiven. RVD was poised for beating Triple H, which would have made Triple H look like a paper champion, because, again, he was only awarded the title. Then Flair comes out. He has the sledgehammer. He looks like he's going to deal the blow to Triple H, and then bam! Right to the abdomen, right to the sternum of Rob Van Dam. Triple H nails the pedigree, and he solidifies his place as a legitimate World Heavyweight Champion, and already one half of Evolution was completed.
Good God, and I believe that is where we actually got the birth, or just like the genesis of Evolution, which consisted of Ric Flair, Triple H, Randy Orton, and Batista. And the story behind, the concept behind Evolution is intriguing to me, because it's like, we had the legend, we had the current veteran, and then we had the future. Past, present, future. Past Ric Flair, present Triple H, future Randy Orton, and Batista the bodyguard. The concept of the team, it did a lot of good things, especially for Randy Orton and Batista. That stable, if anything else, was probably the best stable of the Ruthless Aggression era. That was the ultimate antagonist stable. I believe there was a time when they all won the championships. Am I right?
Absolutely. Randy Orton was Intercontinental Champion, Batista Flair, Tag Team Champions, and Triple H the World Heavyweight Champion. In fact, I remember that was Armageddon, I believe, of 2003. And, the night after on Raw, the opening segment was they were all standing on that stage together. And he said, Evolution now has all the gold. And they all held it high. And I'm thinking, you motherfuckers. But really looking back on it now, Alyx, Evolution was cool. It was stylish. It was that partying lifestyle, but they were winners who were partying. They weren't partying without a cause. They were doing it because they were so damn good at what they, did. Orton was the up-and-comer, cocky as hell. Triple H was the guy at top of his game. Flair was the master of the game. He understood. He was the tree of knowledge in the group. And he had Batista, that muscle-bound destroyer, just killing bitches. And Evolution, again, it was cool, it was hip, it was things that we hated and loved at the same time. As a little kid, I loved it when people rebelled against Evolution, but probably because I knew I'd never be as cool as them. Did you see the girls they'd get with? I couldn't tap that in 5 lifetimes. Jesus Christ.
Jesus, yeah, I agree with you. But I think the best thing about Evolution, and to me, I think what made it great, was the fact that this was when Triple H was at his prime. This was when he was the ultimate heel, but he wasn't one of those, I'm scared of you heel, I'm gonna cheat to win, and he was using dirty tactics once in a while, but Triple H was a dominant champion. He was one of the people that actually said, I'm gonna win, I'm gonna hold this championship for a long ass time, I'm gonna keep this championship, and there were days where he actually said, I'm gonna hold this championship, and he would do it, and cleanly. That was the time when he had that feud with Eugene, HBK as well, and he dominated both of them, and he said he was gonna do it. He wasn't one of these typical cookie cutter here that we see nowadays in WWE. Triple H wasn't that. He was the actual dominant heel. I'm the best in the fucking world, and you have to rip this championship out of my bare hands. You have to cut my hands off to take the championship away from me. He was part of the reason why I believe the Ruthless Aggression era was actually one of my favorite eras. Probably, yeah, I'll even say it. That was my best era. That was the better era to me than the Attitude Era. I thought that era was the real era where wrestling started to really, take its roots as, something great.
Alyx, we're talking about a man who said that title meant more than his own life. I mean, he was willing to cripple men like he did to Shawn Michaels. That's why he crippled him. He saw Shawn Michaels as a threat. When you go that far to pretty much incapacitate another man and to completely diminish his quality of life simply to protect your own self-serving interests in what you care about most, holy shit, am I not terrified of you. I will never cross paths with you ever again. And, then after that, we see that Evolution starts to break apart. Randy Orton goes out on his own because he did what Triple H couldn't do, beat Chris Benoit. And we see that breakdown. He's still the heel. Then we see Batista leave. Then we see, Triple H ultimately turns on Flair. He did take a little bit of time, though. I feel like he got injured in between those two periods, and then when he came back to tag with Flair, he turned on him, and, you know, they had a feud there. And ultimately, he'd be a heel for a good chunk of the time. He didn't turn face again until, well, maybe you can help me with that, Alex. Oh, wait, I remember. He was having problems with Vince. Yeah, it was Degeneration X, because he was trying to get the WWE Championship off of John Cena, who was hot as hell at the time. And, you know, Vince was giving him problems, and Vince was feuding with Shawn at the time, and Shawn's like, you know, don't be such a sellout. You know, what's gotten into you? All you care about are these things, and you should realize that we should be fighting the same battle, because it won't be long before Vince turns on you. And just one night, it just clicked with Triple H, and he's like, you know, man, fuck this. And him and Shawn reunite for some hilarious segments against the McMahon family. It's
interesting, too, because it was around that time when Triple H actually donned the King of Kings gimmick. And that actually was the pinnacle of his evolution. We had this man go from a guy that was a degenerate, who was just breaking the rules and having fun, then he turned serious and then turned into this guy, this sawed-off muscle that just wanted to be the best. And then he got to Evolution, and he felt like and believed that he actually was the best. And he didn't want to give up that spot. A man that was willing to do anything and everything to really hold on to that spot. And that just evolved from being the game into the King of Kings. The guy that just believes, I'm the best in the world. I am the measuring stick. And he went out there every single night and said it. I'm the measuring stick of this business. And you have to really do a lot to prove me wrong. Because I've done so many things. I bled. I've sweated. I cried. I've done everything for this business. I'm the student of the game. I am Triple H. This is me. I am the best that this wrestling business can actually offer. You know.
King of Kings was amazing. In fact, he cut one of my favorite promos during that time. It was on Edge, because they were debating over who should face John Cena next, and Edge was like, hey, I've beaten John Cena. I am a WWE champion. And Triple H is like, oh, yeah, you are. Damn it, though. I was asleep for 20 minutes, and I missed the whole thing. And I'm like, oh, low blow. But getting back to the DX reunion and his actual face turn, one of my favorite segments was when they impersonated the McMahons, and all Shawn Michaels is doing is dancing, and he's like, look at me dance, Dad! Look at me dance! And then Triple H is like, shut up! And then he's like, son, are you mildly retarded? And it just made a total mockery of the McMahon family. I love that feud. In fact, it's one of my favorite segments of all time. When I think of really hilarious segments, that tops the list.
Yeah, that was actually during the time when Triple H started get back into being himself. Because for a long time, he was just being this serious, you know, person with no personality. And then when he did that reunion with HBK, he actually let loose and went back to being who he was again. And, you know, that just really mixed well with his King of Kings gimmick. It helped define who he was as the King of Kings. You know, it helped establish himself in that part of his career.
I just feel like at that point, and some people would disagree with me about this when they look at the career of Triple H, but I feel like that's when he perfected it. I feel like that's when he perfected walking the line, because I remember when the McMahons enlisted Big Show, and Big Show bloodied them both, and it was a huge beatdown. The week after, Triple H comes out and he says, we've got 2 words for you. And then the crowd's like, suck it! And he like takes another pause and he says, thank you for reminding us who the hell we are. And it was this serious promo, and they come out and they're ready to tear shit up. And, you know, he learned to walk the line and to be the guy that, yeah, he can have fun, yeah, he can be serious, but at the same time, you know, just get the job done when it needed to get done. I just feel like that was a point where Triple H really perfected it and became a teacher of the game rather than a student. So, you know, and to me, that run would last a little bit. I feel like it ended, 2007, 2008?
Right.
And, you know, he's still a face at that time. We really haven't had, like, any prominent turns or anything. And then he, you know, becomes WWE champion shortly thereafter on the SmackDown brand. And, you know, he had that feud with Jeff Hardy. So really not much evolution. In fact, honestly, I would call this one of the lowest points for Triple H. And how ironic, because it was, you know, allegedly on top being the WWE champion. But he was just so stale to me. Like, honestly, I forget any prominent promos he had as a face during that period, because it's just like he was forgettable as that kind of a face being on top. There was nothing to really fight against. There was nothing to really rebel against. I mean, if anybody was going to rebel against anything, it was, you know, rebelling against Triple H, because he was the champion. So, you know, to me, this was Triple H's driest point, because I really feel like at that point he had nothing left to prove.
Seriously, man. Honestly, I think we touched on Triple H strong enough, so Unless you want to add some more things to it, of course.
No, I feel like we've done it. I feel like we've really ended this on a well-rounded note, and now the next guy, Mrs. Foley's baby boy, Long Island's own, Mick Foley. No, not Zack Ryder. Mick Foley, to me, is just, it's ineffable what this man is, because this is the same man that can hug a child and visit a pediatrics hospital and read books to children, and in that same breath, rock back and forth in a rocking chair and tell you in such graphic detail how he was going to cave your skull in and taste your blood and think that it tastes like Chinese food. The early yes, exactly. Mick Foley was more of a worldly kind of wrestler. We've seen him do the King of the Death matches in Japan, the barbed wire massacre matches. He lost his ear in Germany doing one spot where he gets tangled all up in the ropes. But really, as far as the evolution, he's had 3 huge stages. You've had Mankind, Cactus Jack, and a persona which was something that he did as a young man, Dude Love, to the point where it actually became a film about Dude Love. His climb to the championship. To me, really Mankind and Cactus Jack, Alyx, I don't know about you, I really don't see much of a difference in the sense that they're both bloodthirsty, they're both psychotic. In fact, I remember how Mankind came to be. Mick had a meeting with Vince, and Vince actually wanted to call him Mason the Mutilator. And Mankind just was not feeling it, so he just said, how about Mankind the Mutilator, which of course later became Mankind. That was the first character to have a different opening and ending theme. And he was just somebody who would just be completely at peace when destroying his opponents. I remember he used to stab himself. I remember an interview segment he did with JR where it ended with him using the mandible claw, which he fell in love with because it was a nerve hold, and it was something very out of place for a supposedly psychotic character. And what I love best about Mick, and then I want to get your thoughts, Alyx, is how he defined a psycho. In his book, Have a Nice Day, he said a psycho wasn't somebody like George Animal Steel who could bang his head and eat turnbuckles. A psycho was somebody who could be in their college dorm, sitting Indian-style naked in front of a television, eating a plate of brownies, and not see anything out of place about it. So I loved how he had that mastery, how he made the supposed psycho character, he forced it to evolve. What do you think?
Yeah, man, he pretty much hit the nail right on the head. We had Mick Foley here. Another wrestler that started off actually in WCW, was very frustrated, went to ECW, then came to WWE, as John just said, as Mankind. And we started to see him just go to work in this role as Mankind. He understood the psyche, understood how to really make people go, holy shit, something's wrong with him. Something's not right with Mick Foley. It was like one of those characters, one of those people that knew how to really make a character mean something to the audience. And he demonstrated that with Mankind and Dude Love and Cactus Jack, really. And so you looking at somebody that just defined what a wrestling character should be, Mick Foley really demonstrated that during this time.
I mean, Dude Love was my least favorite personally. I do remember it was at that same In Your House pay-per-view, which I own on VHS. He had a match against, ironically enough, Stone Cold Steve Austin for the WWF Championship, and we saw that, when he was Dude Love with Austin, they actually won the tag titles, but he turned on Steve because he knew that he was the champion and, sided with Vince. It was a good match. I just really didn't like the character. Dude Love, to me, will always be my least favorite.
And honestly, John, I completely sympathize with that. Me personally, my favorite character still is Mankind. Some of them say Cactus Jack is their favorite character. I never grew up with Cactus Jack. Mankind was the one that I was, invested in when watching WWE. That's the one that I wanted to see win the championship off The Rock, and that's the one that I will always say was Mick Foley's best gimmick.
Absolutely. To me, Mankind was just something so detached, so warped from reality. And then Cactus Jack was, I feel like Mankind, only not necessarily as psychotic, but where it lacked in the psychosis, it made up for in bloodthirst. And, Cactus's feud with Triple H over the WWF title, their street fight at the Royal Rumble 2000, amazing. What a fucking match that was. Those two killed each other. And what I loved about Mick was that he really didn't look like a tough guy, Alyx. He had kind of the belly going on, the gut. And, he looked like a scruffy guy. He looked more like the common man than the common man himself. But it took so much to beat him down. And at that match, It took a pedigree through thumbtacks to pin him for a 3 count. I mean, really, his spirit was indomitable.
And, you know, that match was amazing. But I don't think people really connected with his spirit more than with his match with Taker in 1998. The Hell in the Cell match at King of the Ring. The night where he got thrown off the top of the Hell in the Cell, landed through the announcer's table. That was supposed to end it. The paramedics came out, everybody said that's the end of the match. Mick Foley got halfway up that ramp, got off the stretcher, turned around, and he came back and finished the match. Mick Foley even said in his book, he doesn't even remember mostly what happened in that match. But because of that will, the determination to really go out there and give the fans what they want, he went out there and finished the match with Taker. And, you know, it was one of those moments that, in my opinion, that was the moment that we really got an idea of who Mick Foley was. You know, we had his career in WCW, we had that career at ECW that he was doing some good things, then he had that moment with Mankind when he first came in. You know, all that led up to that Hell in the Cell match where we really told ourselves, this is who Mick Foley is. If anybody wants to know who Mick Foley is, watch his Hell in the Cell match with Taker in 1998, King of the Ring. That, my friends, that was a defining moment for not just Mick Foley, but for wrestling, period.
The boys in the back gave him a standing O for it, and Mick even said in his book, you know, he felt like the feud had really played itself out. He wanted to raise the bar. Taker was dealing with a broken foot at the time, and I believe Mick himself was dealing with injuries, though I can't quite recall what specifically they were. So Mick just said, we just got to do our best. We got to do something crazy. And Taker throws him off the cell, and JR's even going, my God, he killed him! My God, he killed him! And JR's like freaking out. And like you said, the balls of Mick Foley, they must have been the size of friggin' grapefruit, because to get up from that stretcher, to smile, and that thing caught in his nose and his mouth that everybody thought was a booger or something was a tooth. There was a tooth in his mouth, jutted in his mouth. It was disgusting. But that's how dedicated Mick Foley was to create a memorable moment. The match was only, Alyx, 8 minutes? It wasn't a long match. And yet, in those 8 minutes, they created more magic than any 20-minute match, 30-minute match that I have ever seen. And that's just my personal opinion. Because when in 8 minutes, you're going to be thrown off a cell and choke slammed through the roof onto a steel chair and then tombstone. Not only did that make Mick Foley seem like an unbeatable motherfucker, it made Undertaker look exactly how he was supposed to look. And that's as the true phenom of WWE. And there were thumbtacks in that match. Foley got put through thumbtacks. I mean, what is it going to take to put you down? Stay down. And I think that match, Alyx, legitimized both men and really took both men to a whole new level.
And, you know, that lasted with him throughout his career. Mick Foley became that guy where it's like, this man will fight you to the death. He will throw everything at you, including the kitchen sink. And people were getting behind that. Because when they saw what he did that night, it was really getting behind the fact that this guy will do anything to really give us what we need. And fans were like, that's my man. I need to get behind Mick Foley. And the night when he won the World Championship, it's one of those times where the fans saw Mick Foley win and people lost their fucking lunch. Because, for fuck's sake, Mick Foley, a guy like that, who sacrificed everything, who sacrificed his body, who sacrificed his life to the wrestling business to win the World Championship, that was a really, really good defining moment for not just Mick Foley, again, for not just Mick Foley, but for the wrestling business as well, and for the World Championship, to have a moment like that.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, it was the classic adage, hard work pays off. You know, Mick Foley personified that, he embodied that, and I just feel like that title win was so important because we knew who Mick Foley was. We knew who Mankind was. He was a guy, he had a family. Yeah, he had a wife. Yeah, he was the common man despite the fact that he was dealing with many mental issues. But he was also a guy that was a champion of the people, and I feel like they could all really rally behind Mick, as Mankind especially. You know, again, Cactus Jack was my personal favorite. Dude Love, I hated. But, you know, he had many great moments as Mankind. Rock and Sock connection. I mean, we got to touch on that. I remember in Armageddon in 2000, Mankind and The Rock teamed up against New Age Outlaws in a classic match, which had Al Snow interfere and cost Rock and Sock the tag titles. But so many memorable moments with Mick. In fact, we were talking about that Stone Cold segment where he beat up Vince in the hospital bed. I mean, Mankind was a part of that with Mr. Sacco. Oh, Mr. Sacco. And, you know, we see him, he kind of dwindles down, you know, when he gets even outside of the wrestling, because he retired after that Hell in a Cell match with Triple H, which was my God, that was mind-blowing. He does kind of like a robot show where robots are battling each other. He gets back in the wrestling business, returns for that four-way bout at, what was it, WrestleMania 2000, and, doesn't win the belt, but again, gets such huge pops because people just love Mick. They eat it up, and doesn't win the belt. Then he becomes commissioner, if I'm not mistaken. He does take on a commissionary role, governing the talent, and that would lead to some hilarious moments with the likes of Kurt Angle and Edge and Christian and guys like that, and I felt like he did very well as a commissioner and being a part of the wrestling business, but not as an actual wrestler.
And this was the time where we started to see Mick Foley come out with a different personality. He was coming out with more of a comedic role. He was not being so serious, not being so, just psychotic. He was being down to earth. He was being lively. He was, making jokes. He was, have a nice day and all that kind of stuff. And that's when he started doing those cheap pops where he would name the city just by saying right here and blah, 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 blah. And the crowd would just go nuts. He started to connect. He started to be human. He started to connect with the audience. And, that actually helped identify Mick Foley even more. He wasn't just seen as this crazy psychotic man that was just going out doing whatever. No, he was being seen as this lovable person, this lovable guy that just loves to entertain, and it just started to really define who Mick Foley is, and it just started to build off from there. You know what I'm saying?
He was you and me. That's who Mick Foley was. He was you and me. He was our fellow horsemen, Ashton and Preston. He was the everyman. He wore flannel. He drove the SUVs. He listened to Christmas music 365 days a year. Okay, that's when he stops being you and me. But, he had a sweet tooth. He had vices like everybody else, but that's what made him so great, because he was us. When he held the world title, I think we could all feel like we were holding it up high with him. When he had those classic bouts, we felt like we were experiencing it with him. When we lost our breath at saying what he would do, we could only assume he was as well, because he was so connected and so grounded with us. That's why I love Mick. That's why I loved his return when he feuded with Orton, because when Orton spit in Foley's face, I stood up and I said, "Hey Randy, you're spitting in mine." That's why I love Mick, because he identified with guys like you and me, Alyx.
And it's because of that identification that he can, even possibly now, he can put over all these talents. Mick Foley is the reason why people like Randy Orton, Edge, Triple H, even The Rock, even way back then he had to, or why not? The Rock, all these talents that he helped make by feuding with them. Because of that connection with us, he was able to make these guys into strong antagonists at the time. And even nowadays, I would even say, if Mick Foley was to go out there and have a match with, like, a Dolph Ziggler, I honestly think he could still make that connection with us and make us despise Dolph Ziggler in a good way, to where he could be a legit threat to who Mick Foley is. At the same time, when you're a threat to Mick Foley, you're a threat to us, because we see Mick Foley as the guy who we would be going into the wrestling business.
Keeping it purely from a WWE standpoint, and to anybody inquiring, are we going to talk about Foley's TNA run? Now, we're not going to touch on that, because there is evolution there as well, but I would like to keep it linear, keep it purely WWE. The last time we really saw evolution with Mick Foley, in my eyes, Alyx, was when he teamed up with Edge after having the, air quotes, greatest hardcore match in history at WrestleMania 22 to stop the ECW invasion, and he cut an infamous promo where he was bleeding from the brow, and he said, "How dare you people call me a whore? You think I sold out? You think I hated ECW? I love that place. But she was the woman who didn't love me back. Took everything I had, took everything Mick Foley was worth, and she crushed it, and she spit on it. So at one night stand, I spit back." And seeing that kind of heel Mick Foley, that bitter heel, was very refreshing, because I feel like no matter if he's a face or a heel, Mick Foley has the ability to tap into that place. That place that I think, Alyx, I'm going to be honest, is another reason why he identifies with you and me. Because that place that I'm so fond of that Mick Foley taps into, that pure rage, that unadulterated anger, that resides in all of us. I think Stephen King said it best when he was talking about horror movies. He said, we love horror so much because there are gators in our head that need to be fed. And we do that through watching horror and watching acts of gore and violence. Mick Foley personified that. He was the gator in our heads. And just seeing that rage come to the forefront, him wanting to destroy ECW and what it stood for, the very thing that he loved and grew to loathe, I just loved it. I thought it was very compelling programming.
The interesting thing about his heel turn, what made that heel turn special was the pride he had. It was the fact that people were calling him a sellout, left ECW to become what you was in the WWE. Mick Foley said, you're absolutely right. I did. Because I had to do what was right for me and my family. Now, if you want to call me a sellout for that, then fuck you. It was one of those realistic things that just made me love him even more. Because once again, I mean, he could have pandered to what the crowd wanted, but he said, I'm not going to do that. It's one of those things, it's like, I'm doing things for me, for Mick Foley. Where he said the greatest hardcore match, which obviously wasn't the best hardcore match in in the history, but it was like a pride issue. It's one of those things that Mick Foley was saying, this is the greatest hardcore match because I said it is. I'm the fucking hardcore legend. I busted my ass. I did everything to redefine hardcore. I'm not going to let you determine what my life is. I think that was the pinnacle of his evolution. When he took control of what he was. It was one of those things where he gave his life to the fans and he took it back. This is my life now. It used to be yours. Now it's my life. In my life, this is the best hardcore match, and I am the best hardcore legend there is. That's what I say.
The humility was stripped, and that's what I think made it work. The humility was stripped down to its bare bones, and what was left was a bitter, angry man, because people who were challenging the claim that WrestleMania 22 is the greatest hardcore match of all time, Mick Foley took that as a personal affront to his legacy. Because as you said so beautifully, Alex, Mick Foley deems himself, the king of hardcore. Who can touch me? Who can beat me? Who are you to judge my work? And, it's just, to me, that's what I love about Mick. Exactly what you said. Another character whose feelings were based in realism and created extraordinary, motives and actions. And those are the best kinds of characters in wrestling.
Definitely. I think we're done with Mick Foley. Should we move on to The Rock?